It was absurd, really, the way betrayal could feel like salvation. One moment I was the enemy in his eyes, the next, I was the only man he couldn't let go of even if it cost him everything. The first time I saw Daniel Mercer, he was on the other side of the courtroom, standing tall, the embodiment of law and loyalty. His suit was pressed so perfectly it could cut glass. His voice steady like a gavel striking wood. He wasn't my ally. He wasn't supposed to be. He was the lawyer who had been hired to tear me apart, to prove I was guilty, to dismantle my life one calculated argument at a time. And yet, even then, I couldn't take my eyes off him. Maybe it was the way his jaw clenched when he spoke, like he carried the weight of the world behind every word. Maybe it was how his gaze lingered a second too long whenever it collided with Mineas if something inside him faltered. Just for me. Or maybe it was the ridiculous, gut-wrenching fact that, in that suffocating courtroom where everyone was ready to crucify me, Daniel looked like the only person who saw me as human. I hated him for that, and I wanted him for that. The case wasn't Smollett was the kind of high-stakes corporate lawsuit that could ruin reputations, strip families of everything, and make headlines on the evening news. My name, Evan Hayes, was already smeared across every screen, every paper, every whispered conversation. I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't even reckless. I had been framed. But in America, innocence wasn't about truth, it was about who could tell the better story in front of a jury. And Daniel Mercer told stories with the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of a poet. So why the hell did he slip me a glance during cross-examination that said, "I don't want to do this to you"? Why did his questions suddenly grow softer when I stammered? Why, after the trial was adjourned, did I catch him standing in the parking lot under the rain, staring at me like he'd forgotten how to breathe? I didn't trust him. Not at first. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I snapped one night, when I found him in the hallway outside the courtroom. Alone, his tie loosened, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He startled, as if I'd caught him red-handed. "Like what?" "Like you give a damn." The corner of his mouth twitched. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, rain staining his expensive shoes. "Maybe I do." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "That's rich. You're literally being paid to destroy me." He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just stared, his silence heavier than any confession. It wasn't until a week later, when the case was at its ugliest, that I learned the truth. Daniel wasn't just some lawyer on the other side. He was fighting against his own conscience, battling with something bigger than rules and contracts. Because somewhere between the opening statements and the shredded evidence, he had chosen me, chosen us. And when he did, he broke every oath he had sworn to uphold. The night everything changed, I was on the verge of collapse. The press had painted me as a monster. My so-called friends had vanished, and the walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in. I had no one left, except him. I found Daniel waiting outside my building, leaning against a lamppost like some noir hero who didn't belong in real life. His suit was rumpled, his hair falling into his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't look untouchable. He looked breakable. "You shouldn't be here," I said, clutching the railing like it was the only thing keeping me upright. He stepped closer, the city lights painting him gold. "And yet, here I am." My laugh cracked into a sob. "Do you have any idea what this looks like? You're supposed to bury me. Not what?" His voice was low, urgent. "Not care? Not want you?" The words slammed into me like a car crash, violent and impossible to ignore. "You can't," I whispered, shaking my head, but my body betrayed me. I wanted to touch him, to pull him into the gravity that had been torturing us both since the first day. Daniel reached out, hesitated, then brushed his fingers against mine. It was the smallest touch, but it felt like rebellion, like crossing enemy lines with no promise of survival. "If this destroys me," he said, his breath warm against the night air, "then so be it. But I can't keep pretending that I don't see you, Evan, that I don't feel this." And there it was, the betrayal, the salvation, the beginning of the end. Because once a lawyer switches sides, not on paper, but in his heart, there's no going back. The silence that followed was unbearable. His words hung in the air like a loaded gun, and all I could hear was the hammering of my own pulse. I should have walked away. I should have told him to forget me, to save himself. But instead, I let the moment stretch, let the tension wrap around us like the rain soaking through our clothes. "You don't know what you're saying," I whispered, though the truth was, I wanted to believe every syllable that left his lips. "I know exactly what I'm saying." His voice was steady, but his hand trembled slightly against mine. That tiny betrayal of control hit me harder than any courtroom accusation ever could. Daniel Mercer, the man who dismantled people with precision, was shaking for me. It was terrifying. It was intoxicating. And it was wrong. "Daniel, if anyone finds out, let them." My throat tightened. "They'll ruin you. They already have," he murmured, stepping closer until his shoulder brushed mine, until the heat of him was impossible to ignore. Every night I walk into that courtroom, I destroy a part of myself. And for what? For a client who lies to me, manipulates me, uses me like a weapon? Evan, I don't know how long I can keep pretending I don't see the truth. And the truth is, his voice broke. He leaned in, his forehead nearly touching mine. "The truth is, I'd rather stand by you and lose everything than keep fighting against you and lose myself." I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to pull him closer, to drown in what he was offering. "You don't mean that." But I knew he did. His eyes, storm-dark and relentless, gave him away. We didn't kiss that night. The world wasn't ready for that. Hell, we weren't ready for that. But when Daniel finally left, disappearing into the rain like a ghost, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The war wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival, about hearts colliding in places they weren't supposed to. The trial pressed on. Every day in court was a battlefield. I sat at the defendant's table, pretending not to notice when Daniel's arguments softened around me, when his sharp edges dulled the second our eyes met. His client, a ruthless corporate executive, sat oblivious, too drunk on his own arrogance to see the betrayal simmering under Daniel's skin. But I saw it. I felt it. And God help me, I clung to it. One afternoon, during a recess, I found him alone in the hallway again. He was leaning against the wall, staring at the floor, his tie pulled loose like he couldn't breathe. "You're slipping," I said quietly, approaching him. He didn't look up. "I know. You can't keep doing this. If anyone notices, they've noticed." His laugh was hollow, bitter. "My client threatened to fire me this morning. Said I was losing my edge. He doesn't know why, but he feels it. I'm not fighting the way I used to." My chest tightened. "Daniel." Finally, he looked at me, and the rawness in his gaze nearly knocked me backward. "Tell me to stop, Evan. Tell me to walk away and I will. But if you don't, I don't know if I can." I froze because he was handing me the gun, daring me to pull the trigger. He was giving me the power to end this before it consumed us both. And I should have used it. I should have freed him. But I didn't. "Don't stop," I whispered. That was the moment everything spiraled. Daniel began sabotaging his own case. Not obviously, not enough for anyone to call him out. But little things, questions left unasked. Objections raised too late. Evidence presented without his usual force. I watched it happen in slow motion, watched him chip away at his own armor until cracks showed everywhere. And still, no one suspected. Or maybe they did, and they just couldn't believe Daniel Mercer would ever betray the system he served so loyally. At night, when the city quieted and the world stopped watching, we found excuses to run into each other. Sometimes it was a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse, where we sat in silence, our knees brushing under the table. Sometimes it was the rooftop of my apartment building, where the skyline stretched around us like a promise of freedom neither of us could touch. It was never enough. It was everything. The first time he touched me without hesitation, it was almost innocent. Almost. We were sitting in his car after a late session, the rain drumming on the windshield like an impatient heartbeat. Neither of us wanted to leave, but neither of us had the courage to bridge the space between us. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked, staring at the blurred glow of the streetlights. Regret what? This. Whatever this is. He was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, every damn day. And not once have I wanted to stop. I turned to him, breath caught in my chest. His hand was on the console, inches from mine, trembling with restraint. I reached first, just the brush of my fingers against his. His sharp inhale was louder than the rain. And then he closed his hand around mine, and the world ceased to exist. From that night on, the line between betrayal and devotion blurred beyond recognition. We were no longer lawyer and defendant. We were two men drowning in each other, stealing moments in the cracks of a life that was never ours to claim. But secrets don't stay buried forever. The whispers started small jury members noticing the way Daniel's eyes lingered on me, reporters questioning his uncharacteristic slip-ups. Then his client exploded in fury one morning, slamming his fist on the table and accusing Daniel of going soft. And in that moment, I saw the inevitable storm barreling toward us. "You're going to lose everything," I told Daniel that night, my voice breaking. He cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle, reverent. "Maybe everything isn't worth having if it means losing you." The dam inside me broke. For the first time, I kissed him. It wasn't soft. It wasn't tentative. It was fire, desperation, years of loneliness and longing crashing together in a single heartbeat. His hands tightened in my hair, his breath mingling with mine, and I knew whether we survived the trial or Noti was never walking away from him. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. Electric. Dangerous. Because I wasn't just fighting for my freedom anymore. I was fighting for us. If the courtroom had been suffocating before, now it felt like a coffin. Every set of eyes seemed to burn holes through us, and I swore the walls were closing in with every tick of the clock. Daniel was unraveling, and the world was starting to notice. It began with whispers, reporters scribbling in their notebooks faster than usual, jurors glancing between us with suspicion. But then, on the third day of cross-examination, the whisper turned into something louder. Daniel stumbled. He never stumbled. His reputation was built on flawless execution, every word sharpened to pierce and destroy. But that day, when he pressed the witness, his voice cracked. Not loudly, not enough for the record to catch, but I heard it. I felt it, and so did everyone else. "Mr. Mercer, are you?" Opposing counsel began, a cruel smirk tugging at his lips. "I'm fine." Daniel cut in, too quickly, too harshly. But he wasn't fine. His hands were trembling, his tie pulled too tight, his eyes darting always, back to me. That was the moment the jury leaned forward. The moment the reporters raised their pens like knives. And the moment I knew we were standing on the edge of a cliff. That night, I found him sitting alone in his office. The city sprawled out behind him through the tall glass windows. His jacket hung off the back of his chair, his sleeves rolled up, his face buried in his hands. "You're slipping," I said softly. He didn't move, didn't even flinch, just whispered into his palms, "I know." Then stop, pull back, pretend this never, pretend. He lifted his head, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. "You think I can pretend this away? You think I can stand in that room, look at you, and not feel like I'm being torn in half?" "Daniel, no," he stood, the sudden force of his presence crashing into me. "I made my choice, Evan. I chose you, and now the whole damn world is starting to see it." My chest ached, equal parts fear and longing. "And when they do, what then? They'll disbar you. They'll destroy you." He stepped closer, until the space between us was nothing. His hand hovered near my face, aching to touch, aching to break the last fragile boundary. "Then let them." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "You're insane." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally sane for the first time in my life." And then his lips were on mine. It was desperate, bruising. A kiss soaked in fury and fear and the kind of love that shouldn't have existed but did anyway. My hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer even as every alarm in my head screamed danger, danger, danger. Because this wasn't just passion. This was treason. The fallout came faster than I expected. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse to find reporters swarming the steps. Flashbulbs exploded in my face, questions hurled like stones. Mr. Hayes, do you have a comment on your relationship with Daniel Mercer? Are the rumors true? Did your lawyer compromise the case for you? I froze, blood running cold. Relationship? Rumors? How? Then I saw the headline plastered across every newspaper, every screen. Defense attorney seen with defendant in private late-night meeting. The photo was grainy, taken from across the street, but it was enough. Me and Daniel, standing too close outside his office, his hand brushing mine. Our faces bent toward each other like gravity had betrayed us. Not a kiss. Not proof. But enough. Inside the courtroom, the storm raged. Mr. Mercer, the judge barked. Do you have an explanation for these reports? Daniel stood tall, mask firmly back in place. Your Honor, I assure you, my conduct has not compromised these proceedings. Liar. I almost laughed. He was the best liar I'd ever seen except when it came to me. Opposing counsel sneered. With all due respect, Your Honor, the integrity of this trial is in question. The defendant and Mr. Mercer appear to have a personal relationship. Gasps echoed through the gallery. My pulse pounded so loudly I thought I'd collapse. The judge's gavel slammed. Order. Daniel's eyes flickered toward me just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Enough to confirm everything. Enough to damn us both. That night he showed up at my door. Not in a suit this time, not the polished man the world knew, but Daniel's stripped bare jeans, a t-shirt, rain dripping from his hair, his chest heaving like he'd run for miles. You should hate me, he said the moment I opened the door. You should slam this shut and never look back. Why would I hate you? Because I'm dragging you down with me. Because I've turned your trial into a circus. Because now, even if you're innocent, they'll say you manipulated me. I stared at him, heartbreaking. Do you regret it? His silence was deafening. Answer me, Daniel. Do you regret us? He shook his head, slowly, painfully. Never. Not for a second. And that was enough. I pulled him inside, closed the door, and let the rest of the world fall away. But the world doesn't fall away forever. The next morning, the judge called an emergency hearing. Mr. Mercer, she said coldly, given the allegations and the clear conflict of interest, this court cannot allow you to continue representing your client. Daniel stiffened, his jaw tight. His client read with fury shot to his feet. This is outrageous. You betrayed me. For once, Daniel didn't fight back. He simply looked at me, and in that look, I saw everything. Love, loss, resolve. I withdraw as counsel, he said quietly. The gavel slammed. Just like that, he was gone. The trial moved forward without him. A new attorney stepped in, ruthless and cold, tearing at me with none of Daniel's hesitation. I should have been terrified. I should have felt abandoned. But I didn't, because every night, when the world turned its back, Daniel was still there. Sitting with me on my couch, holding me in silence, his hand steady against mine. The trial might decide my fate. But Daniel had already decided my future. And yet, deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of our war. The courtroom had never felt so merciless. With Daniel gone, the trial became a blood sport. The new lawyer his client hired, some shark with a voice like gravel and eyes like glass, was ruthless. Every witness, every scrap of evidence, every question felt like a blade pressed against my throat. And I was running out of air. But Daniel never left me. He sat in the gallery every single day, no longer in his place of power, but there nonetheless, silent, watchful, unflinching. His presence steadied me in ways I couldn't explain. Whenever I felt myself crumbling, I looked at him, and the world stilled like he was my anchor, the last thing keeping me from drowning. The jury noticed. The press noticed. Hell, even the judge noticed. But no one dared remove him. He was no longer my enemy, no longer my lawyer. He was just a man in love with someone he wasn't supposed to love. And God, how I loved him back. The final week of the trial was agony. Opposing counsel brought out everything: the forged documents, the doctored emails, the fake witnesses. Each piece stacked against me until the weight felt unbearable. The jury's eyes were sharp, skeptical, and the whispers in the gallery grew louder every day. Felt like I was losing, like no matter what Daniel had sacrificed, it wouldn't matter. Then, on the last day, the miracle happened. Daniel had been working in the shadows all along. Not as my attorney, not as my savior, but as the man who refused to let the truth stay buried. He had hired private investigators with what little savings he had left, digging deeper than anyone else had dared. And that morning, just as the court reconvened, he walked in carrying a folder thick enough to crush mountains. The judge arched an eyebrow. "Mr. Mercer, you are no longer counsel in this case." "I know, Your Honor," he said, voice calm, steady, resolute. "But as a private citizen, I have evidence of perjury and corporate fraud that this court must see." The gallery erupted. Objections flew. The gavel slammed again and again. But in the chaos, the truth clawed its way into the light. The emails had been faked. The witnesses had been bribed. The case, the entire damn case, was built on a house of cards. And Daniel Mercer had been the one to set it on fire. By the end of the day, the jury acquitted me. Not guilty. The words rang through the courtroom like a hymn, like salvation. I collapsed into my chair, trembling, tears streaming down my face before I could stop them. The world blurred, but one thing remained sharp, clear, undeniable. Daniel, standing at the back of the courtroom, his eyes locked on mine, his chest rising and falling like he'd just run a marathon. I mouthed the words I hadn't dared speak until now. "I love you." And for the first time, he smiled. Freedom tasted strange. The reporters hounded me, the headlines screamed, and the corporate giant that had tried to bury me went down in flames. But none of it mattered. Not the cameras, not the gossip, not the chaos of a world desperate to tear us apart. What mattered was him. Daniel Mercer, disbarred, disgraced, exiled from the career he had spent his entire life building. A man who had thrown it all away for me. I found him that night on the rooftop of the courthouse parking garage, leaning against the railing, staring at the horizon as if waiting for the sun to rise. "You should be celebrating," I said softly. He glanced at me, a tired smile tugging at his lips. "Should I? You saved me, Daniel, and ruined myself." I stepped closer, shaking my head. "You didn't ruin anything. You chose love. You chose truth." He let out a sharp laugh, but his eyes betrayed him, wet, vulnerable, breaking. "You're free, Evan. You have your life back. Don't waste it on me." I stopped in front of him, close enough to feel his breath. "Don't you get it? You are my life." And then I kissed him. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear, no courtroom shadows hanging over us. Just two men who had lost everything the world valued and found something greater in the wreckage. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me in, his lips fierce and desperate and alive. The city hummed around us, cars and lights and voices, but all I felt was him. All I wanted was him. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine. "What now?" he whispered. "Now," I said, threading my fingers through his, holding him as if I'd never let go. "We start over. Together." The months that followed weren't easy. Daniel worked odd jobs, no longer the polished attorney but still the sharpest mind I'd ever known. I rebuilt my reputation piece by piece, fighting off the shadows of scandal with him at my side. The world judged us, ridiculed us, tried to paint us as villains in a love story they refused to understand. But none of it mattered, because every night, when the noise died down and the city lights flickered outside our window, Daniel would curl against me, his breath warm against my neck, and I'd remember. We had already survived the worst, and we were still here. One evening, nearly a year later, we returned to the courthouse not as lawyer and defendant, not as enemies or allies, but simply as us. We stood on the rooftop again, the same spot where everything had shifted, watching the sun dip below the skyline. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly, echoing the question I'd asked him once before. He looked at me, eyes softer than I'd ever seen, and shook his head. Not for a second. And then he kissed me, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that promised forever. The kind of kiss that proved the world could take everything from us titles, careers, reputations, but it could never take this. We weren't lawyer and client anymore. We weren't scandal or headline or rumor. We were just Daniel and Evan. And against all odds, that was enough. Forever. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.